The dust tasted like betrayal. It coated my tongue, a fine grit of plaster and shattered memories. They had started the demolition. My own son. I stood on the manicured lawn, the morning sun glinting off the teeth of the excavator, a mechanical beast poised to devour my life work. Fiona, his wife, was directing the crew with the imperious wave of a Roman empress, her voice a shrill counterpoint to the groan of stressed timbers. They thought I was 1,000 miles away, enjoying the Floridian sun. They were wrong. This was not just a house. It was a testament to a love they could never comprehend, and I was not about to let them turn it into a minimalist mausoleum. It began 3 weeks ago, in the sanctity of my study. The room, paneled in warm mahogany, had always been my sanctuary, a place where Annalise and I had sketched our dreams onto parchment. Simon and Fiona had come over for what they called a pre-trip send-off. Their smiles were too bright, their hugs too performative. They presented me with a glossy brochure for a coastal resort, a trip I had supposedly been dreaming of. I had no such dreams, but their insistence was a tidal wave, and at 80 you learn to pick your battles. Or so they thought. This was a battle they had started, but I would be the one to finish it. After they left, a disquiet settled in the room. A misplaced portfolio lay on my drafting table. It was not mine. The leather was too new. The embossed logo, a sterile, geometric design I didn't recognize. My curiosity, a trait Annalise always said would be the death of me, took over. I unzipped it. Inside, the stark white sheets of architectural drawings felt alien in my hands. The title block read, "The Blackwood Residence," a minimalist reimagining. My name was not on the plans. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Blackwood, my name. This was my house. The drawings were a desecration. They showed my home, the mid-century modern masterpiece Annalise and I had poured our souls into. Gutted. The sweeping lines, the organic flow of space, the careful interplay of light and shadow, all of it was to be erased. Replaced with sterile white boxes, cold concrete floors, and vast, impersonal panes of glass. They were tearing out the heart of the house, the very features that made it sing, the built-in reading nook where Annalise spent her afternoons, the cantilevered staircase that seemed to float on air. Even the handcrafted rosewood panels we had salvaged from a forgotten theater. All of it, gone. My breath caught in my throat. Forged renovation plans. My signature, a clumsy, unpracticed imitation, was scrawled at the bottom of the permit application. They had planned this for months. The trip to Florida was a ruse, a way to get me out of the picture while they committed this architectural murder. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it left me momentarily numb. I sank into my leather armchair, the one with the worn patch where Annalise used to rest her head, and stared at the plans. This was not about updating a house. This was about erasing a history, erasing me, erasing her. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, hard clarity took its place. There would be no shouting, no tearful accusations. Annalise had always said that anger was a clumsy tool, that precision was the key to true craftsmanship. And I was, above all else, a craftsman. I looked at her portrait above the fireplace, her smile a silent encouragement. She would not have raged. She would have planned. And so would I. I carefully placed the forged documents back in the portfolio and zipped it shut. I left it on the table where I found it. Let them think I was oblivious. Let them underestimate the old man. Their arrogance would be their undoing. The next morning, I feigned excitement about the trip. I packed my bags, allowing Fiona to fuss over my medication and Simon to give me a patronizing lecture on airport security. I played the part of the doddering old father, the man they believed me to be. I smiled, I nodded, I let them lead me to the car. As we drove away, I looked back at my home, not with sadness, but with the steely resolve of a general surveying a battlefield before the first shot is fired. They had chosen the ground, but I would choose the weapons, and my weapon would be the very thing they disdained, the past. I never went to the airport. A short taxi ride later, I was checked into a quiet, unassuming hotel across town. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to a young man named David. He had been my most promising protege, a brilliant architect with a deep respect for historical integrity. He now sat on the city's Historical Preservation Committee, a position I had quietly encouraged him to pursue years ago. When I explained the situation, the silence on the other end of the line was thick with disbelief. Then a simmering anger. "They wouldn't dare, Edward," he said. "Oh, they would," I replied, "and they are." David became my eyes and ears. He confirmed that the renovation permits had been fast-tracked, a few columns likely greased in the process. He also confirmed that the contractor Simon and Fiona had hired had a reputation for cutting corners and asking few questions. Everything was falling into place. My plan was simple, elegant in its cruelty. I would let them begin. I would let them swing the first sledgehammer. Let them tear down the first wall. I would let them incur the costs, the labor, the non-refundable deposits. I would let them believe they had won. The next few days were a strange, surreal waiting game. I spent my time in the hotel room, poring over my own original blueprints, a bittersweet communion with my past. Each line, each annotation was a memory of Annalise. Her laugh as we argued over the placement of a window, her hand on my arm as we watched the sunset from the unfinished terrace. This house was our love story written in steel and glass, and Simon and Fiona were trying to turn it into a cheap paperback. They saw a property, an asset to be leveraged for their trendy art gallery. They never saw the soul of the place. Their phone calls were a masterclass in condescension. Fiona's voice dripped with false concern. "How's the weather, Edward? Are you remembering to take your pills?" Simon was more direct. "Dad, we've been thinking, when you get back, perhaps it's time to consider a more manageable living situation? A nice retirement community, perhaps? This big house is just too much for you." They were planting the seeds, building their narrative. The old man is losing his grip. He's a danger to himself. His resistance to change is a sign of senility. Every word was another shovelful of dirt on the grave they were digging for me. I played along, my voice deliberately frail. "Oh, I don't know, son. This old house has so many memories." "That's the problem, Dad," he'd say, his impatience barely veiled. "You're living in the past." The irony was so thick, I could have built a foundation with it. They, who were so desperate to erase the past, were about to be crushed by it. I had David pull the original city records, the microfiche files gathering dust in the municipal archives. It was time to retrieve a crucial piece of my own history, a document I had put in place a decade ago, a secret I had kept even from Annalise, knowing a day like this might one day come. Years ago, shortly after Annalise passed, I had felt a profound need to protect our legacy. I saw the way the world was changing, the relentless march of modernity that often mistook history for clutter. With David's help, I began a quiet, meticulous process. I compiled a comprehensive history of the house, its architectural significance, its unique construction methods, its contribution to the neighborhood's aesthetic. I submitted a petition to the Historical Preservation Committee. It was a lengthy, arduous process, but after 2 years of quiet lobbying and detailed presentations, I succeeded. My home was declared a protected historical landmark. The designation was a shield, invisible but absolute. It meant that any alteration, any renovation, any change to the structure required the explicit, detailed approval of the committee. Unapproved alterations were not just a civil infraction. They were a criminal offense, carrying hefty fines and even potential jail time. And Simon and Fiona, in their greedy, arrogant haste, had not even bothered to do a proper title search. They saw an old house on a large lot, not a designated piece of architectural history. They were about to learn the difference, the hard way. David confirmed the demolition was scheduled to begin on a Tuesday. The day before, I had him file the official landmark documentation with the city planning department, along with a formal complaint and a request for an immediate stop work order. We timed it perfectly. The paperwork would be processed overnight, the order issued first thing in the morning. The city inspector, a stickler for rules I knew from my own career, would be dispatched to the site by 9 a.m. The stage was set. All I had to do was make my entrance. On Tuesday morning, I took a taxi to my own street, stopping a block away. I could hear it before I could see it, the sickening crunch of wood, the squeal of tortured metal. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful staccato. A part of me screamed in agony at the violation, but the cold, calculating part of my mind, the architect, urged me forward. This was a necessary sacrifice. To save the whole, a part had to be wounded. I walked the final block, my gait steady, my face a mask of calm determination. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. The scene on my front lawn was one of chaotic, gleeful destruction. A large section of the western wall, a beautiful expanse of redwood and glass that framed the afternoon light, was gone. A gaping wound in the side of my house. The demolition crew swarmed over the structure like ants, their bright yellow hard hats a jarring contrast to the serene green of the garden Annalise had so lovingly cultivated. And in the middle of it all stood Simon and Fiona, beaming, filming the destruction on their phones, no doubt for an insipid social media post about their fabulous new project. I saw Fiona point the camera at the gaping hole. Her laughter, thin and sharp, carried across the lawn. "Out with the old, in with the new," she chirped, a vapid slogan for a vapid life. Simon put his arm around her, a triumphant smirk on his face. They were so consumed by their victory, so certain of their cleverness, that they didn't see me at first. I walked slowly up the driveway, my old leather briefcase in hand. I savored the moment, the last few seconds of their blissful ignorance before their world came crashing down around them. It was one of the demolition workers who spotted me first. He stopped, his sledgehammer resting on his shoulder, and stared. His confusion was a ripple that spread through the crew. The noise began to subside. Simon and Fiona, annoyed by the interruption, turned. Their faces, when they saw me, were a perfect portrait of disbelief. The smiles froze, then melted away, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. Simon's jaw went slack. Fiona's phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the flagstone path. "Dad," Simon stammered, "what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Florida." "I decided to come back early," I said, my voice calm and even, cutting through the morning air. "I was worried I might miss the show." I gestured vaguely at the cottage behind them, and it seems I arrived just in time. Fiona found her voice first, a shrill, accusatory screech. "What is the meaning of this, Edward? You are trespassing on our property." "Your property?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting interpretation of the facts, Fiona. Especially since the deed is still, and always has been, in my name." Their faces flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion. Just then, a sleek black city official car pulled up to the curb. A man in a crisp suit, the city inspector, stepped out, followed by David, who gave me a subtle, reassuring nod. The inspector held a clipboard and a large red sign. He marched onto the lawn with an air of unassailable authority. "This is the property of Edward Blackwood?" he asked, his voice booming. "I have a stop work order for this site, effective immediately." He slapped the red sign onto a stake and hammered it into the lawn. The words "stop work order" were a beautiful, brutal crimson slash against the green. Simon and Fiona stared at the sign as if it were written in a foreign language. "A stop work order?" Simon sputtered, turning on the inspector. "On what grounds? We have all the necessary permits, signed and approved." He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. "My father is unwell. He's not thinking clearly. He signed off on this renovation himself." He shot me a venomous glare, the son of the year, all concern and feigned sympathy for the public audience of contractors. "That's where you're mistaken," I said, finally opening my briefcase. I pulled out a thick, bound document. "You see, what you have is a permit based on a forged signature and a fundamental misunderstanding of this property's legal status." I handed the document to Simon. His eyes scanned the cover page, his face growing paler with each word he read. "Declaration of Historical Landmark Status," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Fiona snatched it from him, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "This house was declared a protected historical site 10 years ago," I explained, my voice ringing with a clarity that belied my age. "Any unapproved alteration is not just a violation of city code, It's a criminal offense. And what you have done here, I gestured to the gaping wound in my home, is a textbook example of unapproved alteration. You see, the plans you submitted, the plans you so cleverly forged my name on, were for a simple renovation. They would never have been accrued for a landmark property. You would have needed a full review by the Preservation Committee, a review that takes months, even years. The city inspector, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. Attempting to demolish a designated landmark is a serious crime, he said, his voice prim. We will be launching a full investigation. And you, he said, turning to the bewildered contractor, you'll be lucky if you don't lose your license over this. The contractor, a burly man who had been a silent observer until now, turned a furious shade of red. He rounded on Simon. You told me this was all above board. I've got a crew to pay, materials ordered. You're going to be hearing from my lawyer. The beautiful, intricate web of their deceit was unraveling, thread by painful thread. Fiona began to sob, not from remorse, but from the sheer, unadulterated rage of a spoiled child whose favorite toy had just been taken away. You did this, she shrieked at me, her face contorted in an ugly mask of fury. You stubborn, selfish old man. This was our future. We had investors, a gallery. We took out loans against this house. The admission hung in the air, a final, damning confession of their greed. You took out loans against my house, I corrected her gently. A house you had no legal right to alter or leverage. A house that represents a legacy you clearly have no respect for. I looked at my son, at the man he had become. The disappointment was a physical ache in my chest. This wasn't just wood and glass, Simon. This was your mother's heart. And you were willing to sell it for a trendy gallery and a lifestyle you couldn't afford. His face crumbled, the arrogant smirk replaced by the pathetic, bewildered expression of a man who has just lost everything. The fallout was swift and merciless. The contractor, true to his word, sued them for breach of contract and damages. The bank, upon learning of the fraudulent loan application and the house's landmark status, called in their debt immediately. The investigation for attempting to destroy a landmark became a public spectacle. Their names and faces splashed across the local news. The story of the greedy son and his social climbing wife trying to swindle the old architect was a juicy piece of local gossip. Their public disgrace was absolute. I, on the other hand, was vindicated. The city, embarrassed by their oversight, fast-tracked the permanent protection order for the house. David and a team of historical restoration experts oversaw the repairs, meticulously recreating the damaged section from my original plans. The process was slow and expensive, but I didn't care. It was a labor of love, a final act of devotion to Annalise. I spent my days on site, not as a client, but as a consultant. My knowledge and experience finally valued. My passion for the craft reignited. The house, once a symbol of betrayal, slowly became a symbol of resilience. As the final pane of glass was set in place, and the last piece of redwood was polished, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since Annalise was alive. The light streamed into the room just as we had designed it, a warm, golden embrace. The house was whole again, and in a way, so was I. I had not only preserved our architectural legacy, but I had honored her memory in the most profound way I knew how, by fighting for the beauty and integrity we had created together. Simon and Fiona disappeared from my life. Their trendy gallery never materialized, their lavish lifestyle a casualty of their own hubris. The last I heard, they had moved to another state, their reputations in tatters. There was no reconciliation, no tearful apology. Some wounds, I've learned, are too deep to be healed, and some betrayals are too fundamental to be forgiven. Their absence was not a void, but a quiet space, a silence that allowed the house and my own heart to breathe again. There was, however, an unexpected postscript to this sorry chapter. My granddaughter, Maya, Simon's daughter from a previous marriage, reached out to me. She was a quiet, thoughtful young woman in her early 20s, an artist herself. She had always been on the periphery of the family drama, a silent observer of her father's relentless ambition. She came to the house one afternoon, a sketchbook in her hand, her eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. She apologized for her father's actions, her words simple, sincere, and utterly devoid of the artifice that had defined him. She asked if I would tell her about the house, not as a piece of real estate, but as a work of art, a piece of history. She wanted to know about her grandmother Annalise, the woman she had barely known. And so, in the quiet afternoon light of the restored living room, I began to tell her our story. I showed her the original sketches, the faded photographs, the secret details only a creator would know. I saw in her eyes a genuine curiosity, a nascent respect for the past that her father had so casually dismissed. Her visits became a regular occurrence. We would sit in the study, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 creative conversations, and talk for hours. She showed me her own work, bold and full of a raw talent that reminded me of Annalise. A tentative bond began to form, not based on obligation or inheritance, but on a shared appreciation for beauty and a quiet understanding of loss. It was not a replacement for what I had lost, but it was a beginning, a small, hopeful shoot of green in the scorched earth of my family. Now I live a simpler life. The house is my sanctuary, its silence a comforting companion. The permanent protection order ensures that it will stand long after I am gone, a testament to a time when craftsmanship mattered, when a house was more than just an investment. I often sit in the reading nook, Annalise's favorite spot, and watch the sun set, the light painting long familiar shadows across the floor. I think about family, about the tangled threads of love and obligation, respect and greed. Justice, I've come to realize, is not always about punishment. Sometimes it's about preservation. It's about protecting the things that matter, the legacies that define us, from those who are too blind to see their true worth. Their betrayal was not a clean cut, but a jagged tear. Looking at the cold, digital lines of her new design, I could feel the phantom limb of Annalise's presence ache. They'd marked the sunroom for demolition, our sunroom, where we danced to crackling records on a Sunday morning, where the light, she always said, was the color of optimism. They saw an outdated conservatory. I saw the ghost of a waltz. Their plan wasn't just to renovate a structure, it was to systematically expunge every trace of a love they were incapable of understanding. It was an act of profound jealousy, not against me, but against a memory. In the sterile quiet of my hotel room, I laid out my own original blueprints, the paper soft and worn like an old love letter. The smell of graphite and aged vellum filled the air. My hands, now spotted with age, traced the lines I had drawn with a young man's confidence. Here, the floating staircase, a design Annalise had doodled on a napkin. There, the conversation pit, where we hosted decades of laughter-filled parties. Each wine a vow, each dimension a shared secret. This was my armory. My plan wasn't just about stopping them. It was about reminding them and the world of what true value is. David was my field marshal in this quiet war, his voice over the phone with a lifeline of sanity. "They've hired a shell company to handle the demolition permits, Edward," he'd reported, his own voice tight with anger. "It's all designed to be fast and opaque." He fed me information, copies of file paperwork, the contractor's shady history. We were two architects, a generation apart, united by a shared reverence for integrity. He saw Simon's actions not just as a betrayal of a father, but as a betrayal of our craft's most sacred principles. His loyalty was a balm on a raw wound. The phone call came on a Thursday. It was Fiona, her voice a sickly sweet concoction of pity and impatience. "Edward, Simon and I have been talking to a Dr. Albright. He specializes in geriatric care. He thinks it would be a good idea for you to have an assessment when you get back." The threat was clear, wrapped in the language of concern. They weren't just attacking my home, they were attacking my mind, my autonomy. They were building a cage for me. And this house was to be the first bar. I played my part, my voice quavering slightly. "Whatever you think is best, dear." Her sigh of relief was audible. My faint frailty was their green light. David confirmed it later that day. "They've moved up the demolition schedule, Edward. They think you're docile, and they want to act fast before you change your mind. They were so sure of my weakness, so confident in their own narrative. It's a common mistake the young make. They see age as a failing, a slow erosion of the self. They forget that time can also be a whetstone, sharpening the mind to a razor's edge. My plan was set. All the pieces were in place. All that was left was to let them walk into the trap they had so eagerly set for themselves. The morning of the demolition, I dressed with purpose. I chose a simple tweed jacket, the one Annalise had bought me for my 65th birthday. It felt like armor. I stood before the hotel mirror, looking not at an old man, but at the sum of my experiences. I was the architect who had stared down stubborn city planners, the husband who had held his wife's hand through her final breath, the father who was about to teach his son the true meaning of legacy. The face in the mirror was lined with grief and time, but the eyes were clear, the resolve within them as solid as bedrock. The taxi ride was the longest 10 minutes of my life. With every turn, the sounds of my home being unmade grew louder. The rhythmic thud of hammers, the high-pitched whine of a cower saw. It was a symphony of destruction, and I felt every note in my bones. I paid the driver and stepped onto the pavement, the air thick with the dust of my own life. They had already taken down the ancient wisteria that climbed the western wall, its purple blossoms lying crushed in the dirt. Annalise had planted that vine on our first anniversary. The rage that filled me then was cold, pure, and utterly silent. I walked up the driveway just as the excavator's claw bit into the roof of the sunroom. The sound of shattering glass was like a scream. Fiona clapped her hands in delight, a grotesque parody of childlike joy. Simon, filming it all, had a look of smug satisfaction on his face. This was their moment of triumph, the violent birth of their minimalist dream on the ruins of my past. They were so blinded by their vision of the future that they failed to see the past walking right towards them, briefcase in hand, ready to call in a debt they didn't even know they owed. Simon's face, when he finally saw me, was a study in controlled panic. "Dad, we thought the flight," he stammered, his eyes darting around as if seeking an escape route. Fiona's reaction was more primal. Her mask of sophisticated boredom cracked, revealing the raw, grasping greed beneath. "You have no right to be here," she snapped, taking a step towards me. "This is our project now." Her possessiveness was laughable. She spoke as if she had earned it, as if their betrayal had somehow conferred ownership. The city inspector's arrival at that moment was a beautiful piece of theatrical timing. When the inspector hammered the stop work sign into the lawn, the effect was instantaneous. The noise of demolition ceased, replaced by an echoing silence. The crew stood frozen, tools in hand. The world seemed to hold its breath. It was in that silence that I revealed the landmark documentation. I watched Simon's hands tremble as he held the papers. I saw the dawning comprehension, the slow motion collapse of his entire worldview in a single, devastating moment. He had built his future on a foundation of lies, and he was finally feeling the ground give way beneath him. "But that's impossible," Fiona whispered, her voice hoarse. "We did a search, a basic one," she added, the admission a fatal blow to their pretense of diligence. "A basic search for a project of this magnitude?" David said, stepping forward. "That's not just negligent, it's reckless." His presence added a layer of professional condemnation that stung them more than any paternal disappointment. They were being judged not just as children, but as incompetent amateurs. For Fiona, who prized her image above all else, it was a fate worse than financial ruin. The meltdown was spectacular. Fiona didn't just cry, she raged. She screamed at the contractor, at the inspector, at Simon for his incompetence, and most of all, at me for my stubborn refusal to simply fade away. "We gave you a chance to have a comfortable end," she shrieked, the words a bizarre confession. "A nice, clean, simple life. And you chose this dusty mausoleum." Her words revealed the truth. They saw my life, my memories, my wealth for Annalise as clutter, something to be tidied up and thrown away. They were just destroying a house. They were trying to Marie Kondo a human soul. Simon simply stood there, broken. The swagger, the easy confidence, the casual cruelty, It had all evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. He looked from the ruins of the house to the ruins of his wife's composure, to the unyielding face of the father he had so profoundly underestimated. He had leveraged a future that wasn't his, and now the bill had come due. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The shame radiated from him in palpable waves. He had gambled his father's legacy and his own soul, and he had lost spectacularly. The aftermath was a slow public dissection of their lives. The local news loved the story. The headlines were brutal. Landmark betrayal, son's grand design demolishes family trust. Their photos were everywhere, their faces a portrait of modern greed. The investor for their gallery pulled out immediately. Their friends, the fair-weather crowd they had worked so hard to cultivate, vanished overnight. They were social pariahs, their names synonymous with scandal. It was a fittingly modern punishment for a couple so obsessed with status in appearances. The restoration of the house became my life's work, a final, beautiful project. I hired the best craftsmen, artisans who understood the soul of wood and stone. We used my original plans, my notes, my memories. As the western wall rose again, piece by painstaking piece, it felt like a resurrection. I was not just rebuilding a structure, I was reaffirming a belief that beauty has purpose, that history has weight, and that some things are meant to endure. The scent of fresh-cut redwood and cedar replaced the bitter smell of dust and destruction. Maya, my granddaughter, became a quiet fixture during the restoration. She would come by after her art classes, sitting on a drop cloth, sketching the craftsmen at work. She never spoke of her father, and I never asked. Instead, we spoke of color theory, of the way light falls across a room, of the honesty of materials. She saw the house not as a backdrop for a life, but as a living entity, with its own story, its own breath. She had Annalise's eyes, not just in their color, but in the way she saw the world, with an artist's empathy. One afternoon, she pointed her charcoal pencil towards the newly installed window in the sunroom. "Grandma Annalise," she said softly. What was her favorite color? The question was so simple, so pure. She didn't have one, I said, a smile touching my lips. She said that was like choosing a favorite note in a symphony. She loved the way colors worked together, the way the gray of the morning sky made the green of the lawn more vibrant. Maya nodded, a deep understanding in her young eyes. She wasn't just learning about her grandmother. She was learning a new way to see. The house now stands as it always has, a quiet rebellion against the transient trends of the world. It is more than a home. It is an archive of a life well lived, a love deeply cherished. The protection order is a legal document, but its true power is symbolic. It declares that some things are not for sale, that a legacy cannot be leveraged, that memory is not a commodity. The scars on the western wall have healed, leaving behind wood that is newer, but a spirit that is stronger, more defiant than before. The financial ruins Simon and Fiona faced was, by all accounts, total. They were forced to declare bankruptcy. The lavish lifestyle they had mortgaged my legacy to obtain vanished like a mirage. They lost their expensive cars, their designer clothes, their cavernous, empty apartment. They were left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own ambition. I take no joy in their suffering, but I do find a certain grim satisfaction in the perfect architectural symmetry of their downfall. They tried to gut my house, and in the end, they only succeeded in gutting their own lives. My days have found a new rhythm. I wake with the sun as I always have. I drink my coffee in the sunroom, watching the light Annalise loved so much fill the space. I work on small projects in my study, designing a garden pavilion for a neighbor, a bookshelf for the local library. My skills, which my son had deemed obsolete, have found a new purpose. I am not living in the past, as he accused. I am simply choosing to live in a present that is enriched by it, informed by it, and respectful of its lessons. The legal battle with the contractor was a messy affair that played out in the local courts. He produced emails and text messages from Simon and Fiona, frantic, arrogant messages that dismissed my rights and urged him to work faster. Their own words became the prosecution's best evidence. They were portrayed as manipulative and deceitful, not just to me, but to everyone they had hired. Every lie they had told, every corner they had cut, was laid bare for the world to see. Their reputation was not just tarnished, it was sandblasted down to the ugly substrate. I was called to give a victim impact statement. I stood in the quiet courtroom and spoke not of anger or betrayal, but of the intrinsic value of a home. I spoke of my wife, of our shared dreams built into the walls. I explained that what they had tried to destroy was not merely an asset, but a vessel of memory, a testament to a lifelong partnership. I wanted the court to understand that their crime was not against property, but against the very idea of heritage. In the end, they were found guilty of fraud and conspiracy to destroy a protected landmark. Their sentence was not prison, but something far more fitting for them: massive fines and court-ordered public restitution. They were forced to publicly apologize and to fund a series of lectures on historical preservation at the local university. The irony was exquisite. The two people who had tried to erase history were now legally bound to promote it. Their punishment was to become unwilling champions of the very principles they had so arrogantly scorned. It was a judgment Annalise, with her keen sense of poetic justice, would have quietly appreciated. Maya is now a regular visitor. She brings her friends from art school, and I give them tours of the house. I've become an unofficial lecturer, explaining the principles of mid-century modern design, the importance of integrating a structure with its landscape. These young, eager minds, they listen. They see the beauty, the intention. They understand that mournalism is not about emptiness, but about the thoughtful reduction to an essential form, a concept Simon and Fiona never grasped. Through Maya, my legacy is being passed on, not through blood and legal documents, but through shared knowledge and passion. We were in the garden last week, Maya and I, pruning the roses Annalise had planted. Her sketchbook was open on the bench, a detailed drawing of the house's roofline on the page. She looked up at the restored wall, then at me. "You saved it," she said, a simple statement of fact. "No," I replied, snipping a dead blossom from a vine. "It saved me." And in that moment, I knew it was true. In fighting for the house, I had fought for myself. I had refused to be erased, to be relegated to a footnote in my own life story. I had proven that I was still the architect of my own destiny. The silence in the house is different now. It's not the silence of absence, but the silence of contentment. It's filled with the whisper of history, the hum of a structure at peace with itself. I can almost hear Annalise's light footsteps on the stairs, her soft laughter echoing in the sunroom. The house is a part of me, and I a part of it. We've weathered the same storm, borne the same wounds, and emerged stronger, more ourselves than ever before. It's a good feeling. This quiet symbiosis of man and home. David still comes by for coffee sometimes. We sit in my study, my original blueprint spread out between his tablet computer. We talk about the future of architecture, the challenges of preservation, in a world obsessed with the new. He tells me my story has become something of a legend at the Preservation Committee, a cautionary tale for greedy developers, and a rallying cry for an older generation. A tale of how the quiet, methodical application of knowledge can be more powerful than the loudest sledgehammer. It's a legacy I hadn't intended, but one I accept with a quiet pride. I've learned that respect is not something you are owed by virtue of age or title. It is something you earn, and sometimes something you must demand. My children saw me as a relic, a stubborn old man clinging to the past. They failed to understand that the past is not a prison. It is a foundation, and on that foundation I built my defense, my plan, my victory. They wanted to tear down the house to build their future, but they ended up tearing down their future because they did not understand the strength of the house's foundation. Occasionally, a car will slow down as it passes my house. People point. Some take pictures. It has become a local landmark in more than just the legal sense. It is a symbol of resilience, a story told in wood, stone, and glass. I am no longer just Edward Blackwood, the retired architect. I am the old man who fought for his home. the David who stood up to the Goliath of his own children's greed. It is a strange sort of fame, but one that I find I do not mind. It means the story of the house and of Annalise will continue to be told. As for justice, I believe it found its own level. The law did its part, but the true consequences were societal and personal. Simon and Fiona were undone by their own character, their obsession with image leading to their public ruin. They wanted a minimalist life, and they got one. A life stripped bare of friends, of family, of respect, of purpose. A sterile, empty box of their own making. It is a fate far more fitting than any prison sentence could ever be. A perfect, minimalist hell. Sometimes, I wonder if Simon feels any remorse, not for the money or the status he lost, but for the history he tried to erase, for the father he betrayed. I suspect not. People like Simon do not learn from their mistakes. They merely learn to resent the people who expose them. His failure was not a lack of cleverness, but a lack of wisdom. He could see the price of everything, from the Italian marble countertops to the imported fixtures. But he could not see the value of anything, especially not the value of a father's love. Maya has brought a new kind of life into these old walls. The sound of her laughter, the smell of turpentine for her painting projects, the sight of her canvases leaning against the furniture. She is not replacing the past. She is adding to it, a new, vibrant layer of history. She is the future of this house, not as an owner, but as a custodian of its story. She understands what her father never did, that you do not honor the past by preserving it in amber, but by living in it, adding to it, and carrying its lessons forward. I'd have started writing a book, a memoir of sorts. It is the story of the house, from its conception on a drafting table to its near destruction and eventual rebirth. It is a story of architecture, that it's also a story of love, loss, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. Maya is illustrating it, her beautiful sensitive sketches capturing the soul of the place in a way that photographs never could. It is a collaboration, a final project, a testament to the fact that creativity, like love, can be passed down through generations. Tonight, the air is cool, and the scent of jasmine drifts in through the open window of the study. The house is quiet around me, breathing softly in the darkness. I am at peace here, in the heart of my life's work, surrounded by the ghosts of a beautiful past and the promise of a hopeful future. I did not seek this fight, but it found me. And in fighting it, I found a part of myself I thought I had lost. The part that designs, that builds, that endures. The part that knows that a good foundation can withstand any storm. My son wanted to get rid of me, to tear down my world and build his own on the rubble. He saw an old man and an old house, and he valued neither. But he forgot that old things have deep roots, and when you try to tear them down, you often find that you are the one who is uprooted. I am still here. My home is still here, and the legacy of love that built it is stronger than ever. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize I was a seed, and in the soil of their betrayal, I have bloomed.